everyone, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video, I'm not gonna lie, I am so excited to film because it's covering my favorite thing in the entire world, and that is fantasy novels. This is a video a decade in the making because today I'm going to be going through the top 10 fantasy books of the past decade. Now keep in mind that these books were organized by the year that they were released and not necessarily by the year I read them. So a book I read in 2019 could be featured in 2012 if it came out in 2012. It's funny because this video did not originate as the best fantasy books of the past decade, simply because I made a YA version of this and posted it a few weeks ago. I was going to make a non-YA version, and then it turns out every single book I picked was fantasy, which honestly looking back should not really be a surprise to me. Obviously because fantasy novels tend to be released in series, I tried to isolate to just one book. If I have picked one book in that series, I try not to pick another book from that series for another year. Otherwise this video would just be me talking about the Way of Kings series for at least 3 of the past 10 years. But anyway, enough rambling. Without further ado, let's start with 2010, and honestly, maybe the one that tops them all. The fantasy that tops them all. And I'm talking about The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first novel to the Stormlight Archive and probably my favorite fantasy series of all time. Obviously it's not completed yet, so obviously some sort of sharp left turn could still occur, though I'm doubtful. But yeah, this is a series that I love with all of my heart in every way, shape, and form. This is the first novel to a truly epic multi-series within a series collection by Brandon Sanderson. This epic of a fantasy novel is multi-perspective. You're following a variety of different characters set in this world. In each novel that has been released so far, you do have kind of a main focus or main character, but you often run into a lot of side characters or secondary characters throughout all the books as well. So if you fall in love with someone in book 1, they might be the main character, you'll still encounter them in books 2 and 3. And this first one, we watch 4 people. First is a surgeon who's basically had to forsake his healing to become a soldier. So we follow a young woman who's basically has the mantle of trying to save her family from financial ruin, and she's taken on a scholarly station to try to do this, dupe the scholar, and they're calling her the liar in this description. Next we have an assassin who weeps as they travel through the halls, and last is a prince who's basically plagued by visions of the past. And all these characters become very intertwined. This is a very complicated fantasy world. It's honestly kind of hard to go deep into, but just know this has a wonderfully complex plot, but also equally lovable characters. It's a story that's very narrative, even though it's so grandly huge, that I honestly can say with full confidence you'll love it. So you should pick it up and definitely check it out. I need to reread this because the 4th one comes out in 2020 and I need to be prepared. So I could read it with you. Moving on to 2011, which also features a very incredible book, and that is A Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. I can't believe it's been so long since we've gotten a King Killer Chronicle novel. But the Name of the Wind series is also one of my all-time favorites. It's very beloved within the fantasy world, as is Way of Kings. So both of these books honestly should not be too much of a surprise. But if you're unfamiliar with the Name of the Wind series, you're basically following your main character Kvothe, and this is a story told in 2 parts. You follow him in present day as he's now just running a tavern essentially in the middle of nowhere, and a chronicler approaches him in this tavern and is like, hey, what happened? Tell me your story. That's because our main character Kvothe is actually a super famous hero, so we kind of follow his story as he's telling it in this tavern, and we're encountering his past as he starts to go to magic school and go on adventures. But in the back of your mind, you're wondering what happened and why is he now in this tavern in present day? I still have no idea. We're still waiting for that 3rd novel. Apparently it's coming out soon. I would say this is a fantasy series that has, again, wonderful characters, but really beautiful writing. I would say Brandon Sanderson to me is the master of plots, and Patrick Rothfuss in a lot of ways just has the most beautiful writing style that will just envelop you from page 1. Another incredible series, maybe one that might be a little easier to get into than an epic like The Way of Kings or the Stormlight Archives, but this obviously made my list. Moving on to 2012, I'm going to select The Blinding Knife by Brent Weeks. This might be my favorite in this series, but I of course have not read the last book yet. This book 2 to the Lightbringer series, which is a really unique and cool fantasy 5-book series that is now completed, which is rare, so all the books are out. But the reason why I really enjoyed this series so much is I feel like it has such a cool magic system that really pulls you in. This is set in a world where magic is based on the spectrum of light, so the more colors in the spectrum you can control, the more powerful you are, but there is a consequence of magic use, which I feel like is an element added to the story which adds really interesting dynamics, and that the more magic you use, it's really harmful to your body and you tend to die very, very young. Therefore, like, conflict in and between kingdoms and going to war obviously has more consequences than just trying to survive it, because even if you're fighting for your life and you make it through a battle, you still might just simply die because your body will give out. On top of this is a multi-perspective story. We follow a lot of different characters, including one who is kind of the leader of the realm because he can control all colors within the spectrum of light. We also follow a young boy as he's first just encountering his powers, and he might actually be the bastard son of someone very important. And dancing in and around those characters are a bunch of people who want to seize power for themselves and manipulate them to their own gain. This definitely combines elements of lots of cool combat and world building and magic. There's lots of war combat and like war strategy with also like parlor politics, which I personally really enjoy, like snide card games where people are just making fun of each other. I'm here for that. But I really, really like this series. To me, it's Brent Weeks' best series that he's put out, so this to me had to win for 2012. Next up, we have Vicious by V.E. Schwab for 2013. This is a book I actually read in 2013 and was actually personally just a really big game changer, which is why I had to include it on this list. This is definitely a more personal selection, so I can understand if you guys have differing feelings about a 2013 selection. But this is one of the first adult fantasy novels I read in high school. Obviously, it's not huge by any means, but it was one that really introduced me to this world of like dark, magic, brooding characters, and kind of made me more comfortable with exploring this genre just kind of outside of my usual YA bubble in high school. So with that in mind, I have to pick this book. Not to mention it's super dark, so addicting, and a book that I love to talk about on my booktube channel when I read it all those years ago, 6 years ago, oh my god. This essentially follows our two main characters, Victor and Eli, who are essentially evil geniuses. They were college roommates and best friends, and they're basically working on their dissertation together, and that dissertation is to acquire like superpowers, and they uncover the only way to do that is to kind of be on the brink of death. Something occurs within their college years that break them apart, and they become from best friends to arch nemesis. And in present day, we follow Victor just as he's coming out of prison and on his quest for vengeance to kill Eli. It's just a really fascinating tale of two dark masterminds trying to destroy each other. And in some ways, I also feel like this is a book that really introduced me to like loving characters who really aren't that great of a person, like gray morality. You're rooting for them in the moment, but like in the long run, they're probably not that great of people. This is a super captivating story, also perhaps a shorter option if you're new to fantasy, and one that's also set in present day, so it's like the modern world setting. So no high fantasy, new world to encounter as well. Super good, I loved it. 2013 me was obsessed with this. Next up we have 2014, and I'm gonna go with City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. I love Robert Jackson Bennett, and I think his novels are just so fresh, and they just, you know, inject so many cool things to this genre. Particularly this series, I feel like combines elements of geopolitical thrillers, like modern, our current time geopolitical thrillers that you might encounter, with a traditional fantasy setting. And because of that, I feel like the pacing of this book is like breakneck speed. You'll not want to put it down because you honestly just are trying to figure out what in the world is going on. Also, I feel like the structure of this series is very strong because it's very geopolitical and dealing with large nation level politics. Each book takes place over a pretty significant amount of time, and between books a lot of time passes. Each one focuses on a primary main character that you kind of see in the background of previous books. So therefore there's also a lot of human elements to this series, and you really fall in love with everyone that you're reading about, that I feel like propels the political dialogue he's having to a new level altogether. It's a series essentially set in a world where there was this one great power that used to rule over not only their people but a bunch of other nations, and they're kind of called the continent. And the reason why they're so powerful is because they can harness the power of gods, and gods themselves kind of control their government, build their infrastructure, and provide them the power and the means to kind of subjugate a bunch of other people. This leads, of course, to one of the nations that are being controlled by the continent to eventually rise up. And when they do this, they actually kill off the gods. When this happens, something called the blink occurs, because once the gods are dead, the entire structure of this once great nation literally disappears instantaneously. Their entire structure of government, gone. Their infrastructure, roads, buildings, ships, simply anything you can think of in terms of having a functioning economy, gone. On top of that, technology, learning, and innovation also gone, because a lot of these people were just relying on magic to kind of propel their nation forward, so people weren't really interested in scholarly pursuits. So the consequences and also the devastation of destroying these gods to this one nation state, huge. Fast forward to present day, we follow our main character in this one, Shara, who's basically a nation of another land, the Sepuri, who basically is the land that rose up, killed the gods, and is now kind of ruling over the continent. And she's traveling there because her job as a international agent is to kind of quell any uprising or just altogether prevent the spread of negative Sepuri propaganda. And a lot of this has to do with killing or destroying any information surrounding the gods. So this is a series that kind of jumps from multiple cities. It has a lot to do with spy drama. And again, it's so good. Could not put this series down. One of the best and just one of the most unique things I've read. It's just superb. Moving on to 2015, I of course have to talk about the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a series I read this past year, similar to the City of Stairs series. I read the whole thing, and also one that is just one of the greatest things ever written of all time. The Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin is exceptional, it is unique, and it is harrowing. Each one won the Hugo Award. The final book also won the Nebula Award, a lauded and well-known series within the science fiction fantasy space. That's because it's just truly exceptional. This is a series set in a world that is constantly faced with catastrophe, and not just a little issue here and there, world-ending, civilization, humanity-ending catastrophe. And that is because the Earth is very alive, almost in a way like a main character. Giant earthquakes, tsunamis happen that just basically can make an ice age overnight. So therefore, groups of people are kind of structured in a way to be survivalists. They have food stored for a very long time, and also roles and responsibilities within communities are very set and very structured. And if you're kind of considered a less important member of society and a catastrophe happens, you might get the boot altogether. On top of that, there are people who have a type of magic in this world that can kind of control the power of the earth. And you would think, given that earthquakes lead to such catastrophe, that these people would be very lauded and celebrated and propelled to high levels of society. They're actually feared and deeply mistrusted and honestly treated terribly. Within this first novel, you're following multiple different perspectives. One, a young girl who's just encountered her powers and basically has to learn how to use them. Two, a woman who is kind of working for the government as a very controlled magic user. And three, a mother basically on a quest to find her child. It's a series that deals with so many topics: race, identity, gender, motherhood, growth and change, and it's so good. It's very depressing, it's very dark, but it's one that will kind of leave you thinking, it'll leave you breathless. It's just so good. And I think about it all the time. Moving on to perhaps a lighter series recommendation in 2016, and that is Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book to the Darker Shades of Magic series, which to me is just an all-around good time, and just a series that personally was one that I could not put down. I found super entertaining and also just lighthearted, but I was definitely emotionally very invested in the characters. This is a fantasy world where there are essentially 4 parallel Londons. There's Grey London, which is our London. There's there's no magic. There's Red London, which is absolutely flourishing with magic. It's just there left and right. People are just living their lives. There's White London, which has been slowly destroyed by magic. It's like become something people consume. It's very dark and very twisted. And the last London has been closed off, Black London. No one can go there. It's been destroyed by magic, and it's basically a no man's land. Our main character, Kel, who is a traveler, he can move between all these different Londons. And in the first one, he meets a slew of different characters. Politics begin to kind of unfold, and you know, it's very entertaining. I like the first one. I definitely think it's the weakest in the series, but moving into the second one, Gathering of Shadows, which is definitely my favorite in the series, I feel like the world is just burst wide open. One, the sequel involves a magical competition. Two, some of our favorite side characters I really feel like get the spotlight in this one. We follow a girl, Delilah, who Kel encounters in the first one, and now she's present in Red London. She's kind of a pirate woman extraordinaire, and she's so entertaining, and you also just kind of begin to see a lot more of the relationships develop in this story. The magic is super entertaining, the world is very lush, and V.E. Schwab's writing is incredibly engaging. So I had to pick this one as my fave of the year. I do of course have to give a shout out to Oathbringer, which also came out this year, which again only can reference one book from a series once, but like I have to mention Stormlight Archives at least one more time. Moving on to 2017, the book I have selected is City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I love political forward fantasy novels. I love things that really reflect our modern world or are really inspired by history, kind of brought in and enveloped in a fantastical setting. And I feel like City of Brass does this exceptionally. City of Brass is a story that is deeply inspired by Middle Eastern history. It's set in 18th century in Egypt in the very beginning, and we follow our main character who is a thief to survive. One day she steals an item that is a magic lamp. She unleashes a warrior genie, and she is whisked away to a whole new world, chock full of genie politics. When she arrives, she realizes she's like a part of this long lost family that was thought to have been destroyed, and it kind of drops her in the political center of this world. Similar to the reasons why I love the City of Stairs, City of Brass also has deeply intense politics that are not things that can be resolved quickly. I feel like the author of this story really gives it time to kind of unfold those conflicts, and it's not like our main character is like dropped into the city and she's like, I have all of your answers, let me figure out why you all hate each other so much, like get over it. No, it's quite the opposite. And you're basically navigating these really complex and dynamic like multi-generations of hatred between all these different groups of people, and it seems so impossible to overcome, but you also encounter characters who are truly trying their best. Again, a super politic forward fantasy, but it does have action, and there is a sprinkle of romance as well. I do want to quickly mention as well, like City of Stairs, where a lot of time will pass between each novel, that is something that also occurs in this series, because I feel like she just wants to give the political problems time to breathe and not trying to solve something overnight, which again I just think is so well done. This is really great. Love all the characters, love all the drama. Can't wait for the third book. All right, 2018 means another Robert Jackson Bennett story. This is Foundry Side, and one of, again, another all-time fave from Robert Jackson Bennett. This is another really intriguing fantasy novel, which to me entwines, again, kind of god lore and Venetian merchant culture with coding at the center of its magic system. I know, sounds peculiar, but hear me out. This is a story which follows our main character, who is a very great thief. And she lives in a world, in a city that is controlled by different merchant lords. And these lords literally have cities within the city. They have walled off areas where commerce and trade and what have you occurs within those walls. Between all the different merchant lords, 80% of the city is kind of walled off. The remaining 20% is called Foundry Side, and this is a lawless land. This is where our main character lives and, you know, does her work. At the beginning of the story, she is hired to steal an impossible object, which, because she is such a fantastic thief, successfully does. But when she steals it, she finds herself in the middle between merchant lord politics. This is definitely a very dark story. It's very gritty, and I love the magic. The reason why our main character is so good at thieving is because she's so great at the magic, which essentially is about language. If you can understand the pattern and how different inanimate objects speak, you can manipulate them to become different. So for example, if you know the language of a stone wall, you can make it stronger, you can make it weaker. And in our main character's case, if you know the language of the floor, you can make your footsteps appear much lighter. No one can hear you coming. If you know the language of the shadows within a wall, you can make yourself kind of disappear. She can hear and decipher these languages and write something back to them in a way that really is very reminiscent to like coding or hacking, but just in a very magical way. This is a story that also has great action, there's romance, and there's just, I love it all. And the very last book on my best fantasy books of the past decade is going to be The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the third and final book to the Bear and the Nightingale series, which I love so unbelievably much, and I think this third book might be my favorite in the entire series. And this is a historical fantasy series where we follow our main character Vasya, and this is a series where you literally watch her grow up from childhood to through womanhood. But in the first one, The Bear and the Nightingale, she is just a young girl who lives in her father's compound. I want to say this is set in like 15th century Russia. Her father's compound is in a very remote and very cold locale. I would say the ambiance and atmosphere of this series will make you feel chilled to the bone. But in the first one, Vasya and everyone who lives in her village, both, you know, ascribe to Orthodox Christianity, but also kind of use folklore as well. However, when Vasya's mother dies and her father gets remarried, his new wife is very devout and kind of vows to get rid of any folklore from the town. When she does this though, a great evil begins to threaten everyone that she loves, and it's up to Vasya to kind of unlock her magic, face the evil, and save the day. That is definitely the first one and definitely the beginning of her journey, because through the course of the next two novels, you follow Vasya. She kind of learns more about her magic, becomes more confident in her magic, and also just kind of travels across the kingdom, travels across Russia, and finds herself in lots of different problems. This is also a series I feel like that really embraces its history and its time period. It's not just using 15th century Russia as a backdrop, but really imbues the politics and the societal expectations that one would encounter in this time period within this story, both as Vasya, but also as things that her siblings have to overcome. It's fascinating, it's beautiful, it's rich, it has so much atmosphere and so much magic, and you just love Vasya, and it's just one of my favorite series of all times. It reads like a fairy tale, and it's just exceptionally done. Alrighty guys, those are my top 10 fantasy books of the past decade. Please let me know down below your top fantasy books, because obviously I'm sure I've missed some. There are so many books I still need to read, so I need to add fantasy books to my TBR. So let me know your faves or ones that I missed in this video, because I need them in my life. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!